I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network, and this is a breaking news alert. Donald Trump has just filed a lawsuit in the United States District Court for the Southern District of Florida to block the January 6th committee's subpoena, arguing that because he is a former president, he should not have to appear before the January 6th committee. He argues that based on separation of powers, he should not be compelled to testify. This is a statement that was just issued by Donald Trump's lawyer. Let me read it to you right now. It says, long-held precedent and practice maintain that separation of powers prohibits Congress from compelling a president to testify before it. After the January 6th committee has undertaken the unprecedented act of demanding President Trump appear for a deposition on Monday, November 14th, he engaged with the committee in a good faith effort to resolve these concerns, consistent with the executive branch prerogatives and separation of powers. But this partisan committee insists on pursuing a political path, leaving President Trump with no choice but to involve the third branch, the judicial branch, in this dispute between the executive and legislative branches. President Trump joins presidents of both parties in insisting that the legislative branch honor the boundaries set forth in the Constitution instead of catering to base partisan impulses. A pathetic statement by Donald Trump's lawyers there, and actually it's not keeping with precedent. In fact, in the January 6th committee's letter to Donald Trump, which contained the subpoena for him to testify, and he was set to testify on November 4th based on the notice of subpoena that he received. What the January 6th committee wrote was, we recognize that a subpoena to a former president is a significant and historic action. We do not take this action lightly. But as you likely know, you would not be the first former president to testify before Congress or to receive congressional subpoenas. Former presidents John Quincy Adams, John Tyler, Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, Herbert Hoover, Harry Truman, and Gerald Ford each testified before Congress after they left office. President Roosevelt explained during his congressional testimony, quote, an ex-president is merely a citizen of the United States, like any other citizen, and it is his plain duty to try to help this committee respond to this invitation. Even sitting presidents, including Abraham Lincoln and Gerald Ford, also testified before Congress. Further, both former and sitting presidents, including President Nixon, Tyler, and Quincy Adams, have provided evidence in response to congressional subpoenas. So contrary to what Donald Trump's lawyer stated in the statement and what's put in the lawsuit, there actually is precedent. Further, contrary to what Donald Trump's lawyer states in the statement, Donald Trump is not the president anymore. He is the ex-president who was involved and a leader of a violent insurrection. And for all of the people who said that Donald Trump was going to testify or should testify and that he has nothing to hide, I say, told you so. And the people who said that were Trump MAGA extremists. And Trump's other lawyer, by the way, Alina Habba, said that he was going to testify and that he should testify. But we knew here on the MeidasTouch Network, told you so, that he was not going to testify. Look, Trump is a coward. He cowers from having to face accountability. How do you know Trump was never going to testify? Just look what he did in the New York Attorney General's special proceeding where she was investigating his fraudulent valuation scheme with the Trump Organization, where he had the opportunity to answer the most basic questions he was asked. This is the valuation of the property. Here's the appraisal. Can you explain this? And what did he do? He showed up when he was compelled after trying to duck it, because that's what he always does. He files every motion in the world to try to avoid having to testify. He only testifies after he is compelled. And what did he do? I plead the fifth. I plead the fifth. I plead the fifth. And then he complains and whines. Oh, everyone's out to get me. Everyone's out to get me. No. If you want to go and testify and defend yourself, go and do it, but stop whining on your failing social media platforms and in your ridiculously small, pathetic cult rallies that you held. Who knows if you could even hold them anymore, because the midterm election just showed how pathetic and weak you are. But if you're going to go to those events and you're going to talk about these issues, then you know what? You should have to show up and speak the truth, or to show up and at least testify, or if you have to show up and plead the fifth, but show up and stop trying to avoid accountability at each and every turn. So Trump filed this in the Southern District of Florida in West Palm Beach, because that has jurisdiction over Mar-a-Lago, the resort where he calls his home. We'll see which judge is assigned that right now. Whether or not the Democrats keep control over the House of Representatives will likely also determine the ability to enforce the subpoena and continue the proceedings, and whether or not the January 6th committee, which is set to expire at the end of this current term of Congress, whether that can potentially continue for purposes of compelling Donald Trump's testimony. But look, it's not a surprise that Donald Trump refused to testify. But here, let me just show you just how pathetic this is. This is Trump's other lawyer, Alina Habba, saying that she believes he will testify. Play this clip.
He's got a couple options here. He can ignore the subpoena and maybe run into a Bannon world, or he can go and plead the fifth, or he can go and testify. Any idea what you think he's going to do, and what would you recommend?
I would recommend that he cooperate, because when you have nothing to hide, that's what I always recommend. The same reason that he always comes out and speaks on any of my cases. He has no issue being deposed, even though the left-wing media would like to pretend that he does. He has no issue being subpoenaed and answering questions about what happened that day, and he shouldn't. What he did was very public, and it was really nothing other than to say to go out peacefully, as we know.
Okay, and then let me show you another clip of this one's of Sarah Palin. And this is Sarah Palin saying that she thinks Trump should testify and that he will testify. Play the clip.
Knowing President Trump as I do, he's probably saying, bring it on, subpoena away, because he has nothing to hide. And no, I don't believe that he committed a crime. I think that the media and those who are obstructionists to so much of what Trump represents, I believe that they just want to hang on to this thing and keep stirring it up. They got to hang on to something, because it can't be his policies that they slam and that they are against. Look what his policies did for our country.
Look, your cult leader is a coward. The biggest coward that there is. He runs and flees from accountability. He led an insurrection against our country, continues to spread disinformation, spread QAnon conspiracy, the biggest coward, the most pathetic individual, really causing the most damage to our country than any other president before him, and frankly, any other factor before him. And I am so glad that these midterms were a repudiation of Trump MAGA extremism by and large. Look, were there some disappointing results across the country? Sure, there were some, but overall, a big repudiation of this coward, of this traitor. He filed this, how long was this lawsuit? This 41-page lawsuit, pretending that he's still the president and arguing that because he's that he still believes he's the president, or even if he's a former president, he shouldn't be compelled to testify before the legislative branch. You know what? These are co-equal branches. The legislative branch is conducting an investigation into the insurrection. You are no longer the president. You should have to testify. And ultimately, what I think would happen in this dispute, Trump will try to drag it out because he is a coward. He'll try to appeal whatever the ruling is and try to bring it to the United States Supreme Court. But look, I think the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which would oversee any ruling by the federal district court judge here, again, we don't know the judge that's assigned yet. The 11th Circuit has ruled against Trump thus far in the Mar-a-Lago search warrant matter. They're not taking that. The 11th Circuit also ruled against Lindsey Graham when he tried to cower out and not testify before the Fulton County special grand jury criminal investigation taking place there. I'd ultimately want to know what the Supreme Court Court would do. But I think if the January 6th committee can have an extension for purposes of this subpoena and enforcing this subpoena, I think that the rulings would not be favorable to Trump in the long run. I don't know what the Supreme Court would ultimately do, but the point here is Trump was never going to testify. He always does these things where he will file the lawsuit to try to block his testimony whenever he is confronted with any type of accountability, because he's a traitor, he's a criminal, and he's a freaking disgrace. I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. Hit the subscribe button. We're on our way to 1 million subscribers. Also, check us out at patreon.com/MeidasTouch. Consider becoming a patron of the MeidasTouch Network and joining one of the memberships there. We're not funded by any outside investors at all. We're purely fueled by you. No matter where you are in the world, you can sign up. Patreon.com/MeidasTouch. Until next time, I'm Ben Meiselas.
At MeidasTouch, we are unapologetically pro-democracy, and we demand justice and accountability. That's why we're spreading our message to Convict 45. That's right, gear up right now with your Convict 45 tees and pins at store.MeidasTouch.com. That's store.MeidasTouch.com.